And welcome back to what is a rather warm coffee roastery. The roaster has been on for a good proportion of today, and it does make things rather warm up here after a full day of roasting. What I want to talk about today is roast levels and how they're described. Everybody's very familiar with this sort of light, medium and dark terminology. But we really don't like to use those terms, as we feel it's just not a very accurate representation of how that coffee was roasted. And in this video, we just want to go through, sort of why that is, and what it is that we do, and how we develop a roast, and how we like to describe that roast's profile. So, if I start off just by showing you some different green coffees, so these are all unroasted from different parts of the world. We have some Thai coffee here, we've got some Sumatran, some coffee from El Salvador, and we have a Swiss water processed decaf here. As you can see, these are fairly dramatically different colours. So if we were to put all of these coffees through exactly the same roast profile, made sure they went through exactly the same thermal cycle of a roast, they would come out at very different colours. There are also many other factors involved as well, things like the density of the bean, the moisture content of the bean. These will always vary the outcome of the roast as well. But as you can see here, we've got a very, very different colour of starting point. So that will also mean that the end point of a roast, again, you're going to have a difference of colours, particularly between these two. This will always, even though it's had relatively lightly roasted, it will always look dark when it's finished roasting. So that's why we don't like to use those terms. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a little bit of how we roast the coffee and the really important stages and the colour gradients through that roasting process. Okay, so here we have some samples of a roast that we've done. What we did, we took some old leftover sort of bits of green coffee that we had and roasted it to a point in the way darker than we would ever normally roast, to show you sort of the full spectrum of a roast profile. What we have here is the first 9 minutes of the roast. So we have sort of minute 1 here up to minute 9. This is the really critical part of the roast at 9 minutes. This is what we call first crack. And what happens there, we start to have some of the outsides of silver skin, which is this here, sloughing off the beans. And it's at this point where the coffee is just about drinkable. We want to go a little bit after first crack, but that's what a lot of people would call a light roast. Just after that first crack period. The problem is if we go too quickly after that first crack, you tend to have still some of this chaff left on the beans, and this can end up with a very grassy tasting coffee. You can also not actually develop the coffee properly, so sort of subtleties of flavour you might not really bring out, and you might start to get more sort of acidic flavours in the coffee and not really bring out the proper flavour. So we want to develop it, and what we talk about is the development percentage, and this is the terminology we like to use, and that is the percentage of the roast of the total time that is spent after first crack. So we'll generally break the roast down into 3 stages, which is called the dry end, Maillard reaction, and then development percentage. So the dry end usually happens, again depending on what you're roasting, but around about 4.5–5 minutes into the roast, which is about here. where we start to lose some of that yellowness of the bean, and we start to get that more starting to get that golden brown coming out in the coffee. So we always mark that on our roast as the dry end. And then we'll go into first crack. Typically, I mean, this one was 9.5 minutes, which is a little quick. I normally would more like 10.5 minutes, but again, it's going to depend on what we're roasting. And then that's the really critical time that we're looking at, is what is the development percentage? It's the percentage of time, the total roast time after the first crack. And I'll show you in a little bit more detail what that all means. So how we develop a coffee is very much this process. When we get a new coffee in, we'll generally know the flavor profiles that we're looking for. So we will roast the coffee and take samples at each percentage point, usually starting around about 8% and working our way up to about 26. Once we have those samples, we'll then cup the coffee, and we will find out from each percentage point where we feel that coffee's at its best, where is it at its most balanced, and the flavors that we've got coming, that we want to come through, are coming through. And once we have that, we can then lock that in, and we know where exactly the percentage point that needs to be roasted to, and we can repeat that very, very reliably, as opposed to relying on a very rather arbitrary color. And we can show you in a little bit more detail. There's a lot more to the roast than just the development percentage, and that can be the subject of another video. But we can show you briefly now the curves and what's happening throughout that roast profile. So this is our typical roasting curve. There's a lot of detail here, and I think the real detailed look into what's going on here and why we're doing what we're doing is probably best for another video, otherwise this is going to go on for hours. But here we've got the slope here, which, as you can see as it's going up, is ever decreasing, and this is really important when roasting coffee, and this is something you don't get when you're looking at large-scale commercial roasting. It'll tend to be on just a very linear scale, going in a straight line, where the coffee just goes in at a temperature, comes out at a temperature. And here we have, this is really what we're talking about. This is the area and the subject of this video that we're really interested in. This is our development percentage, which you can see starts here in this shaded area. And this is really what we've been talking about and what we're interested in. If we start here and look at taking the coffee from just around about that first crack, we're not going to have a developed coffee. We're not going to bring the flavors out. Conversely, if we all go all the way over to something horrible like this, where it is completely roasted to the point of combustion, we're not going to get, we'll have roasted all of the flavour out of the coffee. So it's that sort of happy area that we're looking for, where we're really developing that coffee, that we're just in that sweet spot. And again, different coffees are going to want a slightly different development, as we've talked about, but as you can see here, the colour differential isn't great. And that's why we simply don't like to use colour as a descriptor of how the coffee was roasted. And if you've got any more questions on that, or indeed anything that we've talked about, please get in touch. We are here to help. And thanks for watching.